So thank you all for coming. I'm Bill Alford, and it's my pleasure to host today's panel. First, let me fill you in a little bit on what our format is, and then we'll turn to our guests. So we're incredibly fortunate to have Bob Beamon and Frank Wheaton and Angela Tricolo with us. I'll briefly introduce them, then they'll say a few words of welcome each, and then we'll see a little short video of Bob's record jump in the 1968 Olympics. Then I'll ask a few questions of our guests, and I hope they'll ask questions of each other, and lots of opportunity for you in the audience to ask any kind of question that you'd like. So, again, thank you all for coming. So Bob Beamon, Bob is amazing. So Bob set one of the most important records in the history ever of track and field in 1968 in the Mexico City Olympics. He jumped so far that, as you'll see in the little video, the electronic recording equipment couldn't keep up with the jump that he made, and his jump was called by Lynn Davies, who had won the gold medal in the previous Olympics, Beamonesque. That became a new word in English to mark things that are truly stupendous, and the record stayed on the books for a half century. But as illustrious as Bob was athletically, and he went into the U.S. Olympic Hall of Fame right away, and ESPN named one of the great athletes of the last century, he's even more illustrious as a human being. He's a wonderful, wonderful person. He has done so much in the intervening 50 years to open up athletic and educational opportunities for tens of thousands of people around the world. I know Bob through my work with the Special Olympics. I'm the lead director and chair of the executive committee of Special Olympics International. And Bob started in the late 1960s doing things to help Special Olympics. And he is a Special Olympics global ambassador going around the world on our behalf as a volunteer. Just amazing. I also, while welcoming Bob, want to recognize Rhonda Beamon, sitting here in the front row, without whom none of Bob's accomplishments would have happened. I should also say Bob, in addition to all these other things, is also a designer and an artist and just a person of manifold talent. And sitting right next to me is Frank Wheaton, and Frank has had many and varied impressive careers in radio, acting, modeling. Yes, if we asked on this panel who would be modeling, I think we'd start with Frank. Law, athlete representation, and much more. So Frank, among his many other accomplishments, has helped Michael Jordan in putting together a major charity benefit for the United Negro College Fund. He's worked with James Worthy to do a big program for basketball, again, to bring in kids to take part in that. He's represented John Stockton, Jackie Joyner-Kersee, and a host of other people. So we thought, in addition to being Bob's lawyer and close friend, it would also be interesting for law students and prospective law students now on the track team to hear about the kind of work he does in sports and entertainment representation. And at the other end of the table is Angela Tricolo. So I get the joy of working with Angela in my role at Special Olympics. Angela is our Chief Legal Officer and Secretary of Special Olympics International. And the word Beamonesque that I mentioned earlier applies to Angela. She is a great lawyer, and not only in the analytical sense, but with superb judgment. And she and I are constantly dealing with interesting and challenging situations around the world, 191 countries for Special Olympics. Right. And I thought it'd be really great for students to hear about that kind of work. It's another kind of involvement in sports law and also international law. And just the array of things that come over Angela's desk is immense and challenging. In some ways, it's harder, I think, to do the kind of work she does in a NGO than to do comparable work in a for-profit company, because often our colleagues in Special Olympics, believing, as is true, that they're doing God's work, maybe don't want to hear from the general counsel or the lead director about the importance of certain legal constraints. Anyway, Angela's won all kinds of awards. She has won the Medgar Evers Award for excellence. She's won the Anise Walker Prize. She's won the Keen Miller Prize. Before coming to Special Olympics, she was general counsel for the NAACP for many years. And she's been involved in election monitoring and all kinds of other things. So it's really a great panel. So I think what we'll do next is maybe Frank and Bob and Angela will just say a few words of welcome, and we'll see a little video of Bob in action some years ago.
Well, hello, everybody, and good afternoon. They didn't tell me that they were going to be dressed in elaborate suit gear, but I am happy to be here. I hope to share a few words with you later. I'm always recruiting for law clerks. Two of my former law clerks, Alex Cottingham and Ryan Gribbenberg, are here in the audience.
Stand up, guys.
And they worked so hard with me and continued to be part of our Special Olympics family. Great experience. So thank you for having me here and allowing me to share with you today.
I should say Angela's a great mentor too. So as with Ryan and Alex, there's other Harvard Law School students who want to spend a summer doing something exciting and learning a lot, there's an opportunity.
Well, since the man of the hour is sitting next to me, let me start by saying, first of all, thank you, Professor Alford, for such a genuine and generous invitation. And certainly thanks to all of you for being here this afternoon. We've met many of you already, and I know, like Angela and Bob, we're extremely pleased. I have former law students in Paul Laverme, clients in Ed Gaskin, and certainly there are a couple of kids from Brentwood in Los Angeles who will be here shortly. Nonetheless, before we begin, as Angela says, we'll answer more questions as we begin. But rhetorically speaking, what might Kevin Costner, Anthony Anderson, Eazy-E, NWA, Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre, well, let's take it another step. George Bush, 1 and 2, Paul Rodriguez, Kevin Costner, as I indicated, or better yet, let's take it somewhere else. Venus and Serena Williams, what do they all have in common? Well, they were all from a 10 by 5 square mile city in the center of Los Angeles called Compton, California. That's what they have in common. I too happen to be from the fertile, athletic, rich city and sometimes academically able city of Compton, California. So, as odd as it may seem, there are quite a few tremendous athletes who've come out of Compton. Jane Robbins, a former councilwoman, said there are more professional athletes and more Olympic gold medalists from the city of Compton than from any other city in the United States per capita. I am from that fertile, athletic, rich city.
Should we give you a hand?
So Bob, turn to you, for a moment.
Well, first of all, thank you, Bill, for, you have been so generous in bringing us and thinking about us and bringing us here to give some feedback and information on historically what I have done as an athlete, but also as a person. I think I've somewhat lived a very interesting life, and so what I would like to do is to share with you some interesting points. And I'm sitting next to three attorneys, and I'm sure they've had many sidebars before. But I think where my experience comes from is probably being an associate AD in one of the universities in Chicago, and understanding how it was in the 60s and how it has progressed over the years, and what we need to do as the older guys like me transcend into the new age of sports entertainment. And so you'll hear a lot about this transition, this very interesting part of, I think, how law enters into sports, but enters into sports in a very interesting way. Number one, I'm just going to make one point, and I can turn it back over to Bill, but I think, as I spoke a little bit today about the importance of how it has changed in college or the university's Division I school, compliance with the NC2A has taken on an extraordinary change from the 60s to now. And as I sat there as an associate athletic director, I said that one of the most important things that I have to have sitting next to me is an attorney. And so law in sports is critical, NC2A, but also as these two attorneys or three attorneys have experienced coming across their desks, celebrities, sports stars, and how difficult it is to satisfy the athlete, but also satisfy the benefactor of using the athlete or the entertainer. So I think today you will find how exciting it is from the old school to the new school. So anyway, thank you, Bill, for my introduction.
Thank you, Bob. So, yes. So my technical skills are limited, but let me see if we can show this little video.
A record was set in Mexico City in 1968 that would endure for over 2 decades, one which those who witnessed it thought would not be broken until the next millennium. It became known as the leap of the century. Bob Beamon's first attempt in the long jump was beyond belief. In the space of 6 short seconds, Beamon had leapt so far that even for a field including defending champion Lynn Davis and American world record holder Ralph Boston, the contest was effectively over. The jump was beyond the limit of the measuring equipment.
I thought, well, why is it taking so long? It's been 5, it's been 10 minutes. Then about 15 minutes into the waiting period, they called in to bring in a manual tape. So they measured from the I said, well, I probably jumped maybe 27:10. Maybe I broke the record maybe by a couple of inches. And then my teammate, Ralph Boston, mentioned to me, he said, look, the jump is well over.
When the mark of 8 meters 90 appeared on the scoreboard, Beamon, used to non-metric measurement, still didn't know exactly how far he'd jumped. When he was told that his leap had taken him 29 feet, 2.5 inches, 21 3/4 inches further than had ever been jumped before, Beamon could not believe it himself. When he finally came to realize the enormity of his achievement, his legs gave way under him. He suffered what was later described as a cataplectic seizure, brought on by the sheer emotional energy in his body. Beamon's gold was a foregone conclusion. No one even came near to the previous world record. For many, Beamon's astonishing jump will always be the greatest of all the records achieved in the Olympic Games.
Okay, great. So I think we'll start our conversation and maybe start with Bob. So Bob, could you please describe for us your early years, your youth, and what brought you into athletics?
Bill, good question. Actually, starting out very early on, as a youngster, at least 6 or 7 years old, I played many types of sports, which became a very good part of my life where I wanted to just try something that might be of some excitement to me. However, by participating in softball, basketball, touch football, or running track, I found myself sitting on the sideline trying to find out, well, how these guys are so great. These guys are scoring 25 points. I haven't even scored a point. Or I've ran a half mile and I came in last place. I was out of breath. I couldn't. And so I had to begin to understand the beginning of trying to find that very special thing that would make that an excitement to me. And it didn't come until later. And so what I try to tell the youngsters or the parents today is that please don't try to specialize your children in a specific sport. Allow them to explore winning and losing, because I lost so many races and I jumped so many times. I've struck out so many times that when I won one time, it became a very significant factor in my life that, well, I took one step, maybe I can take 2 steps. Maybe I can take 3 steps. And so as time went on, I became more interested in basketball and track and field. My first love, basketball, and track and field was my second love. And the reasons is that there was always somebody to look out for that played basketball in New York City, where I grew up. As they call it, the Big Apple. It's still called the Big Apple. And so I began to explore basketball and enjoyed all the fruits of now playing with some of the stars that have played in National Basketball Association. So I enjoyed that. But then there was that love again to, where am I? Well, that's a team sport. Maybe I should try an individual sport. And so, as I said, I tried the half mile, the quarter mile. I tried the 100 meters. I tried the 200 meters. I didn't try hurdles. But I tried just about all the running sports. I tried the mile too one time, and I said, wow, when do I get a chance to sit down and rest a bit? And so, Bill, I started very much at 7, and then at 10 years old, I became more interested in basketball, and then 12 years old, I started to move towards track and field. And so track and field from, I think, around the age of 12 years old became more of an interest to me because I won my first event in track and field. And I wore this medal that I won, wow, for just about 6 months on my hat. So I was showing off that I could win a medal in track and field. And so track and field then became a big interest in me. And so I truly can say that I worked hard at it too, because I got beat so many times in long jumping, but I had to work at it. I had to eat and sleep it. So 12 years old was the beginning, and then 15, I started to really branch out. But I'll save that for later, but you get the drift where as I became older, I started to step up my interest, but also I became committed, I became motivated, and I became dedicated to getting to that point. And as we go along today, you can ask me questions, and I'm sure you will have some very interesting questions, but I do have some very interesting stories that, as we go along, I shall share them with you.
Great, great. And when Bob says he liked playing basketball, he was drafted by the NBA, but found other outlets. Now, Bob, jumping ahead a little bit, so.
Guess what? The Phoenix Suns, too,
But no regrets, right?
and the Harlem Globetrotters.
Now, when Bob was a university student at UTEP, we're talking about the 1960s, 50 years ahead of Colin Kaepernick, you took a very brave stand about racial discrimination. I wonder if you paid some price for that. I wonder if you could tell our friends about those events?
Well, the interesting thing about one of the stories is that it took me 3 schools to really graduate. And the first school was North Carolina A&T, which is I understand now, is one of the powerhouses in track and field. And when I attended A&T, they didn't even have a track, as well as they had a part-time coach. So I can say that I enjoyed even the little bit we had, but I had to move on and attend the University of Texas at El Paso. That was the first year that we were recruited to come into an NC2A Division I school. We had just won the national basketball championships. I was so excited to be there because they wanted me to play basketball as well as run track. And so during that time, a lot of racial tension became one of the headlines in this country. And one of the things is that as they had kind of put it on the papers as it was called Black Power, we had the Black Panthers, we had Martin Luther King, we had H. Rap Brown, we had Malcolm X during that time. So it was a very, very interesting time in America. And so at the University of Texas, we took a stand in the conference. It was called the WAC conference. I don't know if they still have the WAC conference anymore, but it was a Division I school. And we, as African Americans, took a stand because we had to compete against Brigham Young University. So Brigham Young has a very interesting practice about minorities and how they felt about them. And so what we did as African American athletes on the team is that we took a stand and said that we will boycott the competition, which was a dual meet between us and Brigham Young. And so we decided to stay home and not attend the competition. And so the athletic director said to us, if we stay home, you lose your scholarships. And so we stayed home and we lost our scholarships. However, that didn't stop us from continuing our education because we had what called a disassociated fund for students that athletes that were, the 10 or 11 athletes that stayed home, they had funds for us to continue our education. However, I had to worry about if I was going to make the Olympic team or not. And so I had to keep focus on what was your real goal in life. And I said, I had to stay focused. You know, there's so many things that could have caused me to have 1 second of losing focus. But since I was motivated and dedicated and committed, Bob Beamon stayed focused. No matter what the situation was, I was going to make this Olympic team. And so I had to go on at the University of Texas at El Paso as an independent student. And I didn't think about what I was going to do educationally. I only thought about what I was going to do to make the Olympic team. So I will leave it for the next question that you might want to ask me so that we can move on to that. But that's what happened at the University of Texas at El Paso. The athletic director was a very special person who should have had the 11 of us just walk into his office and just talk about what do you guys want to do? And at the time, there were no women with scholarships until Title IX. I can't remember when that was, but 69 or 70, one or two. 72. Title IX came into, so there were no scholarships for women. The only team that I know of that was great in sports that was at a university was Tennessee State with Wilma Rudolph and all the great athletes that followed, women athletes followed. But on that, at that university, University of Texas El Paso, there were just men. And so we, as men, stood our ground. The AD just would not let up. And he had some racial tones that made it almost impossible to have a conversation of understanding.
So thank you, Bob. I wonder if you could tell us about what it felt like to make the Olympic team and then head out to Mexico City for the Olympics?
Well, the next step is to continue to train and to continue to have that fire in the gut, in the heart, and in the mind, to make sure that nothing has changed. No thoughts of maybe making the 72 team. No, I wanted to make the 68 team. And so that mid-1967 to 68, I was in competition 22 times, and out of the 22, I won 21 of the competitions. And so I can't remember when I lost. They said that I lost one, so I can't even remember.
Jerry Proctor.
Yes, you're right.
Jerry Proctor.
I don't want to ever have to live that again, but I was one of the world-leading jumpers, and then there was a high school athlete, Jerry Proctor, came to an invitational meet in New Mexico and jumped 26 feet indoors as a high schooler. I think he was probably the first 26-footer in high school, but indoors. And he beat me and the Olympic champion in the, and I said, how could that happen? How could a high school guy just come up and just beat me and the Olympic champion? It just blew my mind. And so from that point on, it was a real serious commitment. Now, I'm going to beat this guy some kind of way, even if they blow me out of a cannon. But anyway, just preparing and working hard and staying focused. I found myself at the nationals, winning the national championships, men and women's competitions in Sacramento, and then I went on to make the Olympic team finally. And we had 3 trials. We didn't have 1 or 2, but we had 3 trials to make the team. And that team was so talented because we all, at that time, could possibly double up in our events. I probably could have ran 100 and probably about 10 seconds flat, or 10-1, or I could have been on the relay team. We had John and Tommy Smith, both could have run on the relay team, the 100. They could have been in 100. They could have been in the, which they were in the 200, but also the 4x1. And they were so incredible that they could have ran in the 4x4 because both of them ran 45 flat or better in the 400. So the team was so talented. We also had the greatest miler of all times, Jim Ryan, who took second in Mexico City. We had some of the greatest athletes to ever assemble to win just about every event. And I think that was the last year that we just cleaned up in every event. And so I guess, do you want me to tell you about the actual day of the?
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you could share just what it was like to break the world's record, and then
Oh,
a bunch of other
boy.
questions.
That's going to be good. I had the greatest opportunity to train with some great athletes, and one of the areas where I really excelled in was my sprinting ability. I was able to just go anywhere from a 10-3 to a 10-1 to a 10, probably a 10 flat, probably if necessary. But I was on to something new. I just felt like, wow, look at me now. It was incredible. At the age of 15 years old, I had jumped 24 feet. At the age of 18, I had jumped 25.6. So I was getting there, but now I'm at 26.11 or 27.4 now, getting ready to stand up at the games in Mexico City. And so, Bill, here's how it goes. The day before, I had had such a strange problem in trying to make the preliminaries because I was jumping, scratching and going over the board. I had 2 fouls and I had one more to actually make it to the next day into the finals. And so my adrenaline was pumping so hard. It was like, that was crazy. It was like, my speed was just off. It was off because I was too fast. I had got into this zone where I didn't know where I was going to go. So I went over to my teammate, Ralph Boston, and I said to Ralph, what do I need to do to make the finals? And he said, move it back 2 feet. And so I said, should I move it back 2 feet? And so I said, you know what? I'm gonna move it back 2 feet. And so I moved it back 2 feet and jumped 2 feet behind the board, and I think I jumped about 27 feet. So it was that day, that evening, where my adrenaline had hit its maximum. As that all I could think about at this time was all of these years that I put into training in the snow, in the rain. I practiced when I was sick. I practiced when things weren't going well, but I stayed motivated. And so, October 18th, 1968, I stand up at this runway, and my heart was like this: boom, boom, the boom, 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 boom. Thousands and thousands of people are watching me in the stands. And I said, I've come 3,000 miles. This will be my day. And as I run down the runway, I could hear the heart just pumping. Boom, 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 boom. Everything comes natural. And so I said, well, this is it. As I get closer to the board, as I get closer to the board, I get closer, and I struck the board. Boom! I went up in the air. I was up 6 feet up in the air, over 6 feet up in the air. And I looked at my watch.
What time is it?
I looked at that watch. Boom! I came down. And I said, well, I landed on my backside instead of landing on my feet. Well, I'll come back and on my second jump, I will, I'll just go back and do something, because I had to, just think about just making the first one and then coming back and then just explode on the next one, boom. And so what was so interesting, Bill, it was, Angela, it was so incredible in terms of how I heard the people roar. I started to hear the people roar and scream, and somebody came out of the stands and, were pulling on, and I said, oh, wow. Well, I probably jumped maybe 27:10. And so they had this measuring device electronically. Boom, they was looking, and they kept looking, and they kept looking, and they kept looking. They said, to the head official, and they said, we can't find a jump. Boom, can't find. And so the measuring device was too short for the jump. So they had to go out to Ace Hardware, back to the United States, to get a measuring. However, as we look at it from the picture, the video, it was, as they say, an eclectic seizure. Became, what is it called?
Catatonic seizure, wasn't
Or is it well, I think that they made up a
Same
new
thing.
term,
it? Let's ask the MIT guy.
And so it became, when I landed and they made the measurement 30 minutes later, the 400 meters was supposed to start right when I jumped. And they held up the 400 meters for 30 minutes so that they could get the manual tape to measure the jump. Until today, I think that they shortchanged me. Anyway, the 400-meter guys that were on the team today teased me today and said, you know, I could have done a lot better if it was 30 minutes, if we didn't take the 30 minutes off. But the jump truly was a surprise to me. But the interesting thing was I had a lot more, but if I only could go back today and have my next jump, my next final jump, I think I could do better today. But that jump has taken me to a lot of wonderful places in the world. As we have celebrated my 50th anniversary, and it is the oldest Olympic record in the history of the Olympics. It still stands today after 50 years.
Whoa. So, Bob, these are an amazing accomplishment by you, an amazing Olympics. So one other dimension of the 68 Olympics, of course, were your teammates, John Carlos, Tommy Smith, and their protest during the anthem. Would you share with us your what it was like to be there with your friends and teammates at that moment?
First of all, how do you like my hat?
It's Harvard track and field.
Just for some and for the younger ones to refresh a little bit, it was quite a interesting experience to see three people on the 200-meter stand after the finals. Two rose their hands, Tommy Smith and John Carlos. And John Carlos and I grew up in New York City and ran track together. And Tommy was on the West Coast. At the same time, there was another gentleman on the stand too from Australia, Peter Norman. When they rose their hand, Tommy and John, he was also the sympathizer of Black unity in this country. And when he got back to Australia, they really took very negative to him, and his life was just truly terrible, and they disrespected him. And along with that disrespect, so you can understand what happened here in the United States when Tommy and John came home. And I think one of the critical things about it was that the media just went nuts. You know, we had one of the greatest Olympics to ever be held, and here our IOC president just made a big spectacle out of it. And these two guys really had a very difficult time here in America, to the point of John Carlos's wife committed suicide. It was that kind of life that came after Mexico City. Until today, I just, I just get so emotional because, you know, it's very difficult today as we are right back into a same situation in some instances. And we have to, in some way, find a way of really healing and getting across the finish line together. Not individuals going one at a time, but we all cross this finish line together because we have to live. We all come from another country, and so we have to just stand strong. But anyway, I don't want to get into that part of it too much, but I just wanted to say it was one of the most difficult times in history. We had lost Bobby Kennedy, we lost Martin Luther King, we lost Malcolm X, we lost so many incredible people. Medgar Evers, who I think Mr. Wheaton has represented that family. Historically, it was so much going on. The drugs really hit the scene very heavy, and Haight-Ashbury, the women's liberation movement was going on, Vietnam War was going on. It was so much protesting, it was every day. Every day. You know, as we see the women's movement today, I'm so happy that the women's movement is going on today because it started way back, way back. Way back, even before the 60s. But anyway, historically, it has truly been a blessing to even get to that point in my life, to witness so many interesting things that have happened in the past. And so I love the past, and it helped me deal with where we are now for the future. So you youngsters have to help us get to the next step. Not only in sports, but in life in general. So we have to be ready for it.
Absolutely. So you have done all kinds of amazing things in your post-Mexico City experience. Let me focus on one to start with, at least, with the Special Olympics. And so, as I said before, Bob has just been unbelievable. But I wonder if you could tell us about what brought you into Special Olympics and some of the work that you've done to help really millions of people around the world be able to partake in athletics.
Well, I was sort of almost just about in the beginning of Special Olympics. Back in '69, I was introduced to Special Olympics through a great Olympic athlete, decathlon athlete, Rafer Johnson. And so he had an incredible relationship with Eunice Shriver and Sergeant Shriver that had a wonderful dream called the Special Olympics. And at the same time, Rafer asked me if I would take part and be a part of the Special Olympics movement. And I said, absolutely. And later down the road, my brother became a Special Olympian too. And so we kind of lost ourselves, particularly at my very young age. My older brother was taken away from me because he had epilepsy and a number of other medical issues that took him away from me for over 40 years. And so Special Olympics was something that brought me back to my brother. And when we met up with each other, he had on his Special Olympics medal, and I showed him my gold medal. And so we both had a wonderful meeting after 40 years of being apart from each other. I never did get a chance to tell you, the background that I've come from. A lot of people say, "Oh man, you came from, or you're a middle class, or And all." I said, "No, man, I came from the projects in New York City, hardcore, no experience about what the world would look like, and so." I thank God that I've had the opportunity to grow and to be a part of Special Olympics. And I give you one very interesting thing that happened this past year. In celebrating my 50th anniversary, Special Olympics was celebrating their 50th anniversary too. And so the interesting thing about it was that I went back to my attorney, Frank, and sat and talked to him and said, is there something that we could actually put together in supporting Special Olympics? And he came up with the idea that we should make a Bob Beamon sports shoe. And I'm so thankful to you, Frank, that you actually put the project together, but also you financed this project, which was truly a blessing in disguise. And so what we did, we went to Abu Dhabi. Thank you. Thank you, Angela, for accepting the idea and to allow us to give away 7,000 Bob Beamon's sports shoes to the Special Olympics World Games. And truly, it was a blessing to see the athletes. Many of them were crying because they had a pair of shoes. I mean, this is so, I can't explain to you how incredible this is to see some people in need but love what they're doing, and to be a symbol amongst other Special Olympians. It was truly, truly one of the biggest parts of my life ever. And I do hope that that we can do the same thing again with Special Olympics, because I think we would like to do something more with the shoes, hopefully in the near future, to Special Olympians around the world. And I guess that's where we go into the law, international law, and to understand how we get this thing done. And so I know that that you'll hear from these two great attorneys. What'd you say, darling? Oh, yes, and plus, yes. And Kester was the person that really brought it to Mr. Wheaton, Frank's attention to make this thing work. But anyway, Special Olympics is truly a piece that will continue to be my life as a global ambassador. I see that Angela is coughing because she's probably got some sidebars to do.
No,
But anyway,
just get choked up.
as you can see, my life has been wonderful with the Special Olympics.
So it was amazing to go with Bob in Chicago, on the west side of Chicago, where he gave away 500 pairs of sneakers to kids with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Really never had anything quite like these amazing sneakers. I forgot to wear the pair I got. I got a pair on the condition that I would buy pairs, pay it forward for other people. And then in Abu Dhabi, 7,000 athletes from around the world, all with intellectual developmental disabilities. Bob, this is sort of a transition, actually, to bring Frank and Angela into the conversation. So maybe we'll start with Frank and then go to Angela. Special Olympics, by the way, 6 million athletes around the world, all kinds of health programs, everything is free, no charges to anybody. It's just an amazing organization. But Frank, so let's start with you, maybe then we'll go to Angela.
I'll tell you, I've heard Bob's story for 30 years, and every time I get completely enthralled with it because it's so fascinating from a very personal standpoint. And all of you, by the way, are witnessing history because you'll probably, very unlikely, get a chance to see another person in the flesh who owns a world record of that kind of stature. 50 years and running. Yes, again. I happen to also represent the person with the second longest record running.
Who's that?
That's Florence Griffith Joyner, 30 years, Flojo. So with Al Joyner, with Jackie, and certainly with Bob, I am in just marvelous company, and I get totally immersed into the story every time. I'll quote one of my former law professors, Justice Bernard S. Jefferson, who wrote the bench book on evidence, by the way, Alonzo, who once said, "I'll be as brief as I can, no matter how long it takes." Just kidding. When I was 3 years old, I looked across the street, and the neighbor was getting a paper thrown to his home. I went inside and begged my father to give me a Los Angeles Times paper subscription. I became fascinated with the news, fascinated with everything that was in it, and he got me that subscription. And for the past 65 years, I've been a subscriber to the Los Angeles Times and many other papers. My father was an avid reader, as was my mother, and I'm an anomaly because as a kid of the 60s, both of my parents were college educated, and as an African American, that was rare. But I was fortunate and privileged to have two well-educated parents who encouraged me to do and be anything I wanted to be. So I wanted to be an astronomer. So I studied everything that I could see and look towards, learned all of the stars in the sky and all of the planets, the constellations, et cetera, et cetera. Fast forwarding, I went through grade school and high school and, succeeded quite well. In fact, I see another Compton Centennial High School former student in the back stand who called my name out in Harvard Square today. And I invited him here, so thanks for coming, Stan. And his daughter is here, a student at Harvard as well. So at any rate, I got an academic athletic scholarship to Willamette University, which is one of the fine Ivy League universities of the Northwest. And there were 9 African-American students there. In fact, we brought Julian Bond there while I was there. A tragic accident took me back to Los Angeles, and I knew I wanted to study radio, television, and film then after studying astronomy at Willamette. So I majored in radio, television, and film, worked at every radio station I could press my nose against the glass, to every television station, everything. Back in those days, WHUR radio was the #1 station in the country in its style and format. It created the Quiet Storm format. It created a number of folks who've gone on to do tremendous things in radio. So I worked there, a show that still runs to this day, some 45 years later, called The Daily Drum, that combined news, music, and information. And I was one of those founding announcers, if you will, at HUR Radio on the campus of Howard University, where Katharine Graham gave a 50,000-foot tower. And that's how that radio station, flourished, if you will. So after working for HUR for some time, I did 1,000 voiceovers. I was the ABC Movie of the Week guy for television and radio, and did 1,000 voiceovers for just about every major concern. Picked up a residual check one day, and the guy said, "Hey, you ever be a print model?" I said, "No, I didn't think I could." "Well, go see Mr. Diamond." Went to see Mr. Diamond. Before you knew it, I was all over the Washington Post, all over every newspaper and billboard in Washington. So after a myriad of commercials and television appearances and shows, and I was on every station in Washington. I said, well, if you can make it here, you got to go where? Got to go to New York. So I went to New York, and fortunately, I became the working most commercial actor in my category in America. I made about 300 national commercials. Amway, Amtrak, Deanwood, Hartford Insurance, Kodak, Polaroid, Millionaire Cologne for Men, Wrigley's, Jell-O, you name it. I did it. I was a billboard guy for Seagram's, VO, Newport, Salem, Norelco. I did it. So I had that wonderful experience. But it pays off later because it taught me what product endorsement was about. Not only did Lee Steinberg represent some of the finest athletes in the world, he was his client's roommate, which is all the experience he had at the time. But I was different and distinguished from that because I had been, the commercial actor, the print model. I knew how product endorsement worked. I knew how to sell, the wife in Pocatello, Idaho, a sack of potatoes, right? I understood it. So I felt I could transform and give that to my clients who wanted to make the transition and crossover into product endorsement. Fast forwarding. After all the stuff in New York, a television series brought me back to California. Counterattack, Crime in America with George Kennedy. Came on opposite 60 Minutes on ABC. So for 10, 12 minutes every Sunday night, I was featured. George Kennedy would throw it to me. I'd represent or tell a story about the .45 caliber thief in New York or the pizza kitchen bandit in Colorado, whatever the story. After 6 weeks, that series was gone. A lot of episodic work thereafter. Hardcastle and McCormick, Greatest American Hero. I did 15 episodes of Matlock, which is a courtroom drama. I was the regular courtroom bailiff in that. It still runs to this day. But then I decided law school is something I always wanted to do. And so I took myself to night law school. And even though you have to stay 4 years once you start part-time, I finished in 3.5. I finished law school, went to Indiana because the bar was before I got out of law school, passed the bar, said that's all I need. And I can be and go anywhere in the world at this point. Fortunately, I do have a California partner. I've tried about 7 cases in 7 different states in America to great renown and interest, I'd like to say, and I'll get to them very quickly. So at any rate, I cut my teeth on free agents. Anybody who said they could run, catch, or jump, I represented them. Wound up paying more rent, Bill, than they earned me commissions. But nonetheless, I realized that there were more agents than athletes. So I said, what can I do to distinguish myself from all the other agents? So I created the first Michael Jordan Celebrity Golf Classic, and I sold it to television. I brought in everybody from Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Dr. J, everybody you can imagine, 40 of those, and held it in a very prestigious place. That got good to me. So we created World's Fastest Athlete for ABC's Wide World of Sports with Westchester County's Jim Spence, who was the head of ABC Sports for 25 years. We did Sports Greats one-on-one with David Hartman with Jack O'Hara. Unfortunately, Jack O'Hara went down in the TWA flight 200, I forget the number on it, from New York to Paris. But we did the deal for Sports Greats with Jack just before that. Then we did events for Milton Berle. Just fantastic stories galore with that alone.
Frank, they don't know Milton Berle.
No, they don't, because most of them weren't born. Even the professors might not have been born. But nonetheless, just a story of all of the Hollywood glitz and glamour that you can imagine. And for a kid from the fertile, athletic, rich city of Compton, California, my appreciation stretches as wide as I can extend my arms, because I thank my parents for taking the covers off of my crucible and allowing me to think and imagine and grow and become whatever I wanted to become. Real fast, Bill, I'll tell this last one. So onward and forward, I went on to represent several mayors, senators, city council persons. I became the television spokesperson for the city of Compton. So every night, I was one of the finalists for Dateline. So when Dateline didn't happen, I said, doggone, maybe I have to just go be a beat reporter in Los Angeles, which I did not want to do because I had been trained at NBC at the network level. So I understood the network side. I did I studied under the tutelage of John Chancellor, David Brinkley, Barbara Walters, all of them at NBC. So a local job was a little less than I wanted, but I was going to do it because it was a time when I needed to. Well, the mayor of Compton, the illustrious Omar Bradley, said, Frank, why don't you come to Compton? I'll let you run all the city departments, 14 city departments. You can be the spokesman for the mayor, city council, fire chief, police captain. I said, no, it's a blessing or a curse. Lo and behold, I was on television every single night because there was some sort of crime or other going on in Compton. I knew all the journalists. They loved the fact that I could give them, if they wanted a 30-second soundbite, I could give them 29.5 seconds on time, full story, fully described of whatever the subject matter was. So that went super well. After I left the city of Compton, never looked back at the political structure there, I got a call from an interesting friend of mine who said they've been to all sorts of lawyers, but they can't find a lawyer. So the little old lady came to me, and her family came to me. And it turns out that they said, our grandfather is somebody very famous. Our grandfather is the late Senator Strom Thurmond, who was a staunch segregationist from the South, who had spewed venomous language for many years. We don't want Negroes in our churches, in our swimming pools, in our cars. But nobody knew behind the scenes that he had taken care of a lady by the name of Essie Mae Washington Williams, who was born in 1925, sired by Strom to his butler, his maid, I should say, because her name was Carrie Butler. The story has not been told yet, but we have delivered a New York Times bestseller called Dear Senator about Essie Mae Washington Williams, written by a very prestigious writer, William Stadium. That story was on 1,000 newspapers around the world, New York Times bestseller for several weeks. Movies wanted to be made and still may be made. So that's another story unto itself, and we'll get into that later. But the last thing, for the last couple of years, I've been one of the lead counsel for the Prince Rogers Nelson estate. So I had the good fortune of representing several of the heirs of Prince. Of course, one that just recently passed was my specific client. But I'd like to proudly share with you that my thumbprint is on all of the 6 posthumous contracts that were signed by Prince that were worth about $100 million since his death. So I've had a very, very fascinating and wonderful career. But in addition to the Carl Lewis, Eric Dickerson, Ron Brown, Darrell Green, Jackie Joyner Kersey, Al Joyner, Flo Joe, Magic Johnson, James Worthy, Byron Scott, and all of them, Dr. Edwin Moses, I've represented Bob for the past 30 years, without whom I would never have been able to visit kings and queens, travel far and near, countries that I perhaps couldn't pronounce. And for that, I share with him personally, and I share with you publicly. I would give back every nickel of every dollar that I've ever earned from Bob Beamon in exchange for the experiences that I've shared and enjoyed.
I'm going to take that commission back now.
Okay. No, it's all a true story, and it's really been that rich, whether in Doha or Saudi Arabia or with the Queen of England. It matters not, it's all very fascinating. And of course, we met Angela a couple of years ago when we became global ambassadors to Special Olympics. So thank you, Bill, for that moment. Thank you, Angela. Bob?
Thank you, Frank. So Angela, thank you, Frank. That was great. That's a hard act to follow, yes. So Angela, as I mentioned before, is our wonderful General Counsel, Chief Legal Officer of Special Olympics. I wonder if you could start essentially by describing, your youth and what you wanted to do and what led you into the law.
Wow, well, that is a hard act to follow. I mean, I was never a model or on TV or an Olympic athlete or any of those things. I was just like a really poor kid from Indianapolis and a Head Start kid. And a kid who didn't even have bus fare by Friday to get to school. So it's good that I got through. And I saw from a very early age that I had to get out of here. So I tried to study really hard and get opportunities, and that led me to college at Georgetown University. And I was a non-traditional student because by the time I started law school, I had had another career as an economist with the Bureau of Labor Statistics in Washington, D.C., and I had 3 small children. And so I went to law school because I was really interested in opportunity. Opportunity and the civil rights agenda had made a way for me to be able to enjoy a life that I think my family members would only have dreamed of. And so I set my goal on being able to give opportunities to other people. And not just as individuals, but through systematic change, through policy, through work that would benefit many, many types of people. So class action cases and other types of cases. And a large part of that for me was mentoring students and bringing others along so that they too could provide opportunities for others. And that was really important for me as a woman attorney. My first clients were people you've never heard of. You would never have heard of any of them. They're not like Frank's clients. These are people who just work every day and they need a lawyer and they don't understand half of what legal jargon is. They just don't get it. But they know they have a problem and they know they need help. And so I spent a lot of time working with my colleagues and with my firm on how we make things simpler, how we explain to people who've never had a lawyer, who've never interacted with the legal system in a positive way, how we can explain their rights, how we can explain opportunities for them. And so that led me to civil rights work, and I worked for a large civil rights organization, the NAACP, and I became their first woman general counsel, which was an amazing opportunity to work on an array of cases, voting rights cases, housing cases, criminal justice cases, education cases, to go to Florida after the 2000 election and interview voters to see their views on the hanging Chad situation and whether or not they had been removed from the registration rolls. But then also to meet with people who had faced economic discrimination or other practices that really people didn't want to talk about, whether it was based on their sexual orientation or their gender or just the fact that they came from a really poor community and didn't have the same resources that others had. And that led me to being an opportunity attorney. And so most of my career has been focused on getting opportunities for others. And that's how I really ended up at Special Olympics. And I, get to sit here with Bob and Frank. I mean, if you told me just in a million years, I never would have believed you. You know, someone would say, okay, we're going to the White House today, or we need you to go to Russia. We need you to go to Panama or Venezuela. We need you to go to Greece and meet with this minister. Okay, you know, and I've just said, okay, yes, we'll do it. I'm glad Alex is here because last summer we had our 50th anniversary in Chicago, and we had a concert with Chance the Rapper. And, you know, I spent that evening, as did Alex and others, handing out releases to dancers backstage. And so you never know where you're going to find us, either sitting down with our really great partner, ESPN, who's our broadcast sponsor, or with other sponsors who support our work, or just with our athletes who have their own stories that are just more powerful than you could ever believe, because they get up every day and they stand on the finish line and they go across it. And really, as lawyers and people interested in change, we really do make a difference. I had the really unique opportunity to meet Darrell Atkins, who you may have heard of, the case Atkins versus Virginia. And it's the case that really said no more death penalty for people with intellectual disabilities. And they didn't use the word intellectual disabilities then. They used another word that I won't use that is offensive. But a lot of people don't know Mr. Atkins. The Supreme Court struck down the death penalty for people like him, but that he had to go back to trial again. And he had to go back to trial, and he was found guilty again and faced the death penalty again. It was just a fluke that really landed him in a different situation. But that experience, sitting in court and hearing how someone who was really unaware of his rights faced a very serious penalty, the most serious penalty of all, really opened my eyes to what lawyers could do to represent people without a voice, who really weren't heard enough, people with disabilities, people with intellectual disabilities and differences, who have gifts, but they're just a different gift. Many are talented athletes. I would say they would give Bob a run for his money doing the long jump or playing basketball. But it's just an incredible opportunity to have a career where you really do affect lives, not just individual lives, but being able to affect a whole system of change. And so we're seeing changes now for people with intellectual disabilities that we've never seen or imagined, never thought would happen. I'm very proud that I have a staff member with ID, and she recently became a notary public, which was an incredible a journey for her, because she couldn't read when she started working in our office 17 years ago. So, you know, if you're here at Harvard, you're at the most elite institution. And if I had any message, it would just be to follow your heart with your work and make sure that you end up doing something that you really love and that you can really change the world, no matter who you are and where you come from. And it's just such a pleasure to know Bob and Bill and Frank. And I'm getting emotional about the shoes because last summer, when we gave those shoes away in Chicago, we went to the poorest neighborhood in Chicago, in the South Side section of that city, where those kids, every one of them had an intellectual disability, and their neighborhood, they couldn't even go out to play because of the violence there. And so I just want to thank Bob again, because so many of those kids had never had a pair of new shoes. You can't imagine the impact that made on their lives. And I hope for them that they're on a new trajectory, of belief in themselves, just from that one experience, from meeting Bob and getting those shoes and knowing that they can walk out of that place with their head up and on to new things. It could be a job, it could be a chance to read, and it could be a gold medal if they're lucky. So I have the greatest job in the world, I think, and greatest client, believe it or not. And I think that's my journey.
I got, you know, while we're here, we have two of the great people that represent Special Olympics. We've enjoyed the athletes that have gotten them, but we need to give out some more of those shoes around the world for Special Olympians, for those with intellectual disabilities. I think, don't you think so? Huh? Come on now, come on now. Hey. So we're ready to rock and roll because we truly enjoyed every moment. And thank you, Frank, for
Thank you for
investing.
Thank you. If I can interject real briefly, Bill. You know, I listened to Angela get a little emotional, and so did I, you know, because all of us who were there, remembering that moment when all of those kids, about 136 kids, when we passed out those new shoes, you would have thought that Santa Claus, the lottery, you know, people that they had lost had all come back into their hearts at once. It was like the greatest gift of all. And if you can only imagine the glee, the joy, the wonderment of it all, that's what we got a chance to experience, which is what I was going to draw the bridge between what Angela does and what I do as a lawyer. A lot of you here may be interested in sports, entertainment, or you may be interested in real lawyer work. And surely, you know, we have important work in negotiating the contracts. I'm teasing because sometimes they tease us and call us the fancy lawyers. But I admire what the real lawyers do with the hard work that they do. And that's why we try to take the influence of entertainers or athletes and we try to marry them with organizations that have meaning so that it puts meaning into their lives. And when you transcend the sport, I advocate for my clients, then you become truly an important sports figure who happens to have an humanitarian dimension, as does Bob. And I've encouraged Venus and Serena to do the same thing. When you put meaning, more meaning into everything that you do, more meaning in eating, loving, and living, there becomes more meaning in you. And Bob's work with Special Olympics, and trust me, he's endorsed every single major sponsor of the International Olympic Committee as well as the United States Olympic Committee. Bob has received every single major highest award given by the IOC, the USOC, and ANOC, the ANOC, Association of National Olympic Committees. The Olympian Award is given away only every 25 years. In 1994, 4 athletes received the Olympian Award aboard the Royal Caribbean cruise ships. Fortunately, I represented 2 of those 4. So it kind of shows you how it works, right? You advocate for your client. But the point is that Micah Ruzioni, Donna Di Verona, and of course, FloJo and Bob Beamon received the Olympian Award, which is given only every 25 years. So our job, or at least I think that my job as an effective sports entertainment attorney, above and beyond looking at the plethora of experience I've been able to enjoy, is to marry Bob Beamon, whose humanitarian spirit and soul is natural, to place him with something like what Angela has described in Special Olympics, so that his meaningful contributions can really be seen and appreciated. Most people won't say this, and typically whenever I tell Bob Beamon's story, I get choked up. Why? Because this is a man sitting next to me that was orphaned at 10 months old. And he spent his whole life after his athletic competitions giving to kids, giving to people around the world. I've executive produced 12 of his celebrity golf tournaments that hosted everybody from Muhammad Ali to Dan Marino to every Olympian you can imagine. And he's raised millions for the Make-A-Wish Foundation. People don't know this. So before I completely break down and cry, Angela, I just wanted you to know that this is the greatness and the presence in which all of us sit.
And I just want to continue my recruitment pitch because those shoes just don't get there by themselves. I mean, you know, there are contracts to negotiate. You got to get them through customs. You've got to get people there. You raise money. You've got to get money out of the country. All of those are great legal issues that require a lot of work. And while it might sound like we're just sitting around sprinkling fairy dust and it's a great, nice thing to do, the work is really urgent. Those shoes help kids in countries where there are no sidewalks or sanitary facilities to walk in a way where they don't get infected or their feet are cut up on their way to school or to the bus stop. And every sponsor that we recruit becomes part of a family that helps us make a difference. But they don't just do it for fun. I mean, you have to really work through their rights and benefits. And that could be anything from how we're going to broadcast an event on ESPN worldwide, or how we're going to get dancers on the stage and get those entertainers represented well on our behalf. So lots of legal issues behind every aspect of what Bob has done and what Frank has done for us.
So thank you, because you have an extraordinary group of people we've been able to bring to the law school.
Yeah, that's where he's going.
Oh, sorry, Bob?
Should they, you think?
Yeah, I'm gonna open up for questions. But I just want to say, you can see why I so enjoy the work I get to do. I was fortunate to be able to take part in the event in Chicago and the one in Abu Dhabi, and just everything Angela and Frank and Bob said is true about just how excited everyone was. And, you know, the shoe is a material thing, but it was also just, these are kids who nobody's given anything to. So just, you know, have Bob Beamon come and spend lots of time. It was just amazing. And the shoe, I have to say, George Pierce, the shoe manufacturer, down on the floor measuring each kid's foot. It was just so cool. Anyway, let's open up for questions. Chance to ask questions. Please don't be shy. Any kind of questions are fine.
While we're waiting for the first question, I'm going to acknowledge one of my clients. I just got a chance to meet him in person this trip, but he comes out of MIT. He comes out of very prestigious educational background, but more importantly, he was referred to me, and I met him. And when I read and experienced his writings, I promise you, take a look at Ed Gaskins here. He's going to be just a screenwriter extraordinaire at the highest level. So, Ed, thank you for coming.
Bill, could I just mention?
Sure.
I'd be remiss. The shoe giveaway came about as the idea of one of our Special Olympics athletes, Kester Edwards, who comes from Trinidad and Tobago, and he wanted others to have a pair of shoes. So he would be someone who a lot of people would just pass by on the street, but it was his idea to do it, and he said, I'm going to give shoes away to every person, and he made it happen. So you never know where miracles come from. They come from everywhere.
Please.
Karina.
Thank you. So I know
It's not on.
that's right. I'll talk about. You guys have all had very accomplished lives and come from kind of rough starts or backgrounds. What would you say is your biggest motivating factor? What has kept you motivated throughout the years when you've hit setbacks or losing coaches or being from these rough starts? What's kind of been the one constant motivator for you guys in your lives?
I'll be brief, and then I'll let everybody answer it. When I was leaving for Harvard the other day, I took my 34-year-old daughter to lunch and dinner. Both daughters went with me. But my daughter, who just received her PhD from USC, she said to me, "Daddy, thank you so much for continuing to motivate me in everything that I do based on what you do." That's what keeps us going.
That's good motivation.
Yeah.
And Bob
Bob.
or Angela?
All right, well, I have a product endorsement question. And I remember when Tiger Woods and both Sean John said, we're not endorsing any products that we don't have some part of ownership. And so has that changed how that business works?
None of that has changed, and I'll answer that quickly so that Angela and Bob can get to the last question. But as I had hoped, and it just depends on where you are in law school, where you are in contracts, where you are in understanding the contemporary news of the day. You know, they're talking about giving college players money and for endorsement. Depends on how you feel about that. Some people endorse it, some people are against it. But the NCAA has pretty much collected it all over the last 100 years. But to your question, you can't always get a piece of the ownership or a piece of the pie as a celebrity endorser, unless you're Michael Jordan. And then maybe you can because you have the leverage. So it's all a matter of negotiation. And if it's a startup, obviously you have a greater chance of getting a piece of the equity ownership. But if you're just, an endorser of great renown, basically it's just a royalty-based deal. And every quarter, every year, you get your celebrity endorsement royalty, and that's it. So ownership takes on a different stature.
And I would say there's another way too, and you see this in the music industry, where artists are going directly to their fans to buy their music. They are bypassed the record company, and that's kind of what Bob did with the shoe. He bypassed the structures and said, I'm going to do this, I'm going to offer this with a great company, and said, here's my vision. I don't need an intermediary to get between me and my vision for a product.
And Angela's absolutely right, because Alanis Morissette was one of the first artists who actually owned her own record company. I can't begin to tell you how much money Alanis Morissette has made over the years. She was brilliant in resisting the royalty-based compensation that the record companies would pay. These days, unless you sell, 100, 200, go platinum or gold, no record company's going to sign you anyway. That's why you have the creation of the iTunes, and now that that's gone, our artists are having to sell their own individual pieces. But as a result, they almost have to own their own record company to sell anything, because only a handful of artists are really being signed at the levels that we once knew.
Maybe could we go back to Karina's question, really good question about, and Frank gave us a terrific motivation, but Bob and Angela, sort of what, both of you are such determined and accomplished people, what, really was sustaining in all those hard times?
I'm going to give it just a couple of words. I can just go back to Abu Dhabi and feel the athletes with the intellectual disability that felt and loved what we were doing. Many of them hugged me and said, And in some cases, some have not ever wore a shoe, a sports shoe like that. And so this makes me want to come back again and again and again. That is the wonderful result that keeps me motivated of doing what I feel is one of the greatest things that I could give back. I don't enjoy getting something, I enjoy giving something. And so I'm always open to give. And it feels so good for me to give. So that's my take on that.
I had just a really strong mother who, she was not the kind of mother who said, turn the other cheek. She was like, if somebody hits you, hit them back. And, she always said, my head is bloody, but I'm bent. So we knew we were going to get hit and we knew we were going to get bloody and messed up, but that didn't mean you put your head down and you give up. You just keep going. And, some of the struggles that, people go through, if you don't get up, you're not going to get up and you're not going to make it. So you got to get up. You got to keep your head up.
Yes, Ms. Thomas. Yeah.
First of all, thank you all for being here. It's great hearing everything. My name is Dr. Dwayne Thomas, and I'm a professor and a sport historian, especially from the Olympics. So
Wow.
my question is for you. And actually, I know Kester, I worked at Special Olympics and helped to create the first leadership program for Special Olympics in 2001. So thank you. So Mr. Beamon, my question is for you because I used the depiction of Tommy Smith and John Carlos and Peter Norman in my Olympic history class about leadership. And so they wear a patch on their sweater, and they also all didn't have shoes on because of some of the things that were. So I wanted the true story about those things that were going on, because what the patch meant, what it meant that they didn't have their shoes on, and the fact that, or is it a fact that they had those black gloves because they didn't want to shake hands with with the, I can't remember who was the
IOC president.
the IOC
Avery
president.
Bundage.
Avery Bundage.
Yeah.
So they didn't want to shake hands with Mr. Bundage. And is that the reason that they had those black gloves?
No. I wish that we had the opportunity to have those two gentlemen. First of all, Peter Norman passed away a couple of years back. They did a special on, I think it was 30/30 or HBO, and that he died with sadness because the country looked down on him for all of those 50 years for supporting Tommy and John. In terms of the black glove, as they were supposed to come out, I suspect, to have the black glove in raising their fist and so forth, they were missing two gloves, and so they shared one glove each, and used the glove in raising their hands up to give the salute. It was described in the newspaper as Black Power. It was not. It was taken out of context. It was a salute to humanity, is that we need to move together in harmony. And we talked about the conditions that African Americans were living back in the 60s. We were talking about after you win your gold medal, you go back to your home and you live in the same condition. We're supposed to you know, this country is supposed to say to us that, you know, the world is open to you. You have the opportunity to move up. We were talking about the black glove the black glove that said we need jobs. We need another type of place to live besides living, as they say, in the ghetto. You know, I came from the ghetto, and it's a different kind of lifestyle. You probably have read about it, but also you see on television. In some areas, it's extraordinarily difficult. We were in Chicago. That's an incredible place to bring up your child where you don't. Well, let's even go further. It doesn't matter wherever you are. It's become very unsafe, and so let us think about the black glove as a way of change in the country, and that's what that was all about. Not so much. I didn't know much about the patch because the glove was so significant that it just overshadowed everything, you know. But I think that was something that Harry Edwards and some of the professional athletes endorsed. Jim Brown, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, just to name a few, Muhammad Ali. They all supported the boycott, and so that was probably the patch that said we support the Black Power movement.
And I think, Professor, just to add to your query, the patch was Peter Norman's way of supporting the collective effort. And that's why he ultimately, as you well know, was vilified in his home country until after he passed away. But John Carlos, both of whom are dear friends of all of ours, and Tommy Smith went to his home country and carried him home, if you will.
Yes, Toya.
Coming from the special Olympics class, I have a question. So regarding, regarding diversity and inclusion for the next 50 years, like we just celebrated, going forward, what would you like Special Olympics to do regarding diversity and inclusion, and how can we move forward? If you have any plans or any ideas?
Wow, yeah. So one of my greatest pleasures is Bill Alford and I co-chair the Diversity and Inclusion Task Force for Special Olympics. And I think a Special Olympics is a gift because it's for everybody. It really does transform people. People think that they're going to be giving back and they really get so much more in return. So my vision would be to reach every person, every community, every individual, so that they could feel the power and the inclusion and the love and the support and the achievement and the friendship and on and on and on. And whether or not they speak English or Spanish, or they're in a poor community, or they just got here, or they're old or young, it's just something for everyone. And in a time where people are so divided, we're really non-political, non-partisan. So you can be in Special Olympics without, I think, maybe getting into a fight with someone about politics or anything like that, because it's really about coming together. It's about inclusion. It's about a new way of living. Bill,
Yeah,
I'll
so I love working with Angela on this. It's just great. And I think she put it very well. I see it as central to our mission in Special Olympics. You know, it's not tangential, but it's really central. If we have, as Angela often says, if you have a great service or product, don't you want to share it with more people? And the demographics of the United States are changing, so we want to capture, share the good things we have to offer. And I think, as Angela said, there's so many gifts that our athletes have, and to be able to experiencing that. And I get, people say sometimes, oh, it's so nice you do this stuff with Special Olympics. And I feel, no, not at all. I get so much pleasure and joy and satisfaction. I meet the niftiest people, including 3 folks I'm here with. Yeah, but we have a lot more work to do, I'll tell you, to be genuinely inclusive. Genuinely inclusive isn't just, adding more bodies. It's actually making the culture of the place different. And that goes not just for Special Olympics, it goes for institutions like Harvard as well.
Here's one that's very interesting. I was in conversation with Kester Edwards, and he indicated that there was a couple of athletes that run the 100 meters that will qualify for the Olympic trials. So here's the next step is where do you come in at, either Frank or either Angela, who possibly will have that information run across our desk, and then there's an athlete that is not knowledgeable of the world out there in the business world of endorsements or Nike or Adidas. Someone says, man, I like that athlete. He is part of da-da-da-da-da. So let us do something with him. And so we have to be now ready for that, because we do have athletes that can make that next step. You might want to make comment on that.
Yeah, at the last World Games, there were dozens of Special Olympics athletes participating in our World Games who would have qualified for their country's national regular Olympics team to take part. This is the quality of performance. But one really neat thing also about Special Olympics is we have divisioning, so it's everything from world-class athletes to folks who have motor skill challenges, and it is great because everybody's to be included. We have about 10 minutes left for other questions or comments or observations.
Questions in the back?
Yeah, please.
It just occurred to me that if you do Special Olympics, the Palestinians have had so many injuries that there must be so many athletes from Palestine, so many people who want to continue their life, who lost limbs or other parts of their body, and I was wondering what your experience with people from countries that experience that type of racism, and specifically Palestinians, if you have any experience with them.
Well, yeah, thank you. So once again, we have athletes in almost 190 countries around the world. We have a great team from Palestine, and they are at Special Olympics for sports, and not for any other reason. It's because for the joy of sports. And we have lots of great stories of the athletes of Palestine enjoying competition with athletes from Israel or other places around the world. So as I said, it's an organization that aims to bring people together and to really celebrate sport. We have athletes of all different abilities, as Bill said. So, and some of those athletes also have physical disabilities as well. But what we do is we accommodate and we try and find a way or a sport for that person so that they can participate in Special Olympics as well. And that's what makes it unique. but it's real sport. It's not just something, oh, fun, playing. It can get very, very competitive. And I would say they would run me off the field at any point because, there are some really elite athletes. And that's what's so amazing about the movement.
Sports, like music, transcends conflict in a great many ways. Several years ago, and certainly in addition to what Angela has already said, because I don't know of any other organization as large that could do more to promote world unity than Special Olympics. But a few years ago, when Bob received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Association of National Olympic Committees, the Sheikh from Kuwait knew that we had a soccer ball that a company wanted to give us, autographed by Bob, and it was going to be Bob's gift to the world. Kids who played soccer all over the world who would otherwise have nothing. Well, the first countries he wanted to take the balls to were like Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, and needless to say, unfortunately, it was more of a dream than a reality. But those are the challenges and those are the issues that are raised in great questions like you just raised, and probably take a day to try to figure out an answer to one or two of them at best.
And then, please.
I was just wondering how you felt when you lost a world record and how you felt in that moment in time versus like today.
Well, I think, Mike Powell broke the record, and, I had a big fight with him,
I could answer a little bit of that question for him.
Actually, you have to, you see, sports is just a hook to bounce off to do other things. See, I want the athletes to understand that sports is just one aspect of life. We probably the younger generation wants to just specialize in that, but you guys have, to me, we have other things that can mean just as much as breaking a world record. Example for me, I've got two incredible, great daughters. Between my wife and I, we've got 4 kids together. We've got about 6 or 7 grandkids, and
Who's counting?
and about 2 or 3 great grands, and we go past the sports and deal strictly in humanity and how we enjoy life in addition to the sports life. So when Mike broke the record, I wished him so much well in life and how he can take advantage of what he has done, because when I broke the record, let me give you a very interesting story, because what happened in 1968 goes like this. I had won so many track meets, like 21 track meets, and I was kind of like the favorite to win the Olympic gold medal. This was the first time that the sporting goods companies, there were 2, Adidas and Puma. They were 2 brothers. One was Armin Dassler and the other was Horst Dassler. Horst Dassler owned Adidas, Armin Dassler owned Puma. They were all living in Germany. That's where the shoe originally came from. So after I won my 21st track meet, I got a call on the phone, and the phone call goes like this. Hello? Is this Mr. Beamon? Bob Beamon? And I was like, I wonder who in the heck is that? She's not speaking good English. Where is she? I'm calling from Germany. And Mr. Omen Dassler would like to fly you to Germany. I said, whoa, Germany. I had never been out of the country, so I'm like, yo, yeah, let's go, let's do it. And so I flew to Germany. So I get on the flight. I'm in, not economy, I'm in first class. So I've got these leather seats. Whoa, I'm looking at the leather seats. I'm like, whoa, I'm big time now. So I get to Germany, and I met there with the lady that was on the phone, which was his daughter, Armin's daughter, that took me back to the office in a Mercedes limousine. And I'm like, man, this is really big time now. And so I get to the office, and so this gentleman, Armin, is facing the water in his office with his back to me, and he says, come in, Pop Beamon. And so I come in, and I'm like, you know, I'm here. Now, he would fly me all the way over here. Now, I wonder what this cat is going to say to me. So he says, you've done extraordinarily well. You are the best in your event. We want to do something. Bob Beamon, what do you want? What do you want? I was like, what do I want? I said, what am I going to say? I was like nervous and stuff. I was like, oh, this is my big chance. This is the big day for me. I said, Mr. Dassler, I'd like 2 pair of shoes, 4 shirts, and a bag. This was the very beginning of the war of marketing, sports, shoes, and outerwear for athletes. This was the time that Adidas and Puma became enemies with each other. The brothers became enemies with each other because they wanted certain athletes in the Olympic Games to wear their mark. And so what I did was, in the preliminaries, I wore Armin Dassler's shoe. And in the finals, I wore Adidas. And boy, did I get it. They had to change the shoe from Adidas to Puma, because they had spent a lot of money in their marketing and advertising that I was going to win in Puma, and I won it in Adidas. So they changed the picture to make that happen. Today, can you imagine if I was asked a question by Adidas or Puma or Nike? How much money would you get? What do you want, Bob? I would say, just hold on just a minute. Frank?
I think my answer would not have included any merchandise. Purely dollar and cents figures. Bob knows that his name and stature commands quite a bit when it comes to endorsements. And It's the way of the world, and Bob is right. He just gave you a quick overview and history of how product endorsement has grown throughout the years. I mean, we know that by the size of sports contracts these days, by the size of endorsement contracts. Tiger has never spent a dime of his winnings on the PGA Tour. Shaquille O'Neal never spent a nickel of his player's salary in the NBA. And he made over $500 million as an NBA player. So it's a different world now in a number of ways, and that's a whole different class, whole different subject. But to the professor's answer that I wanted to sort of segue real quickly, I happen to have the good fortune of representing the world record holder as well, Mike Powell. So there's a distinction, and I say it because Mike Powell, great long jumper, 29, 4.5. Carl Lewis, several Olympic gold medals, both chased Bob's record all of their Olympic years, neither of whom was able to break the record, the Olympic record. And I look at the personalities, and I know the personalities, and I understand the personalities, and I promise you, and Mike's not here to defend this statement, and I think the world of Mike, but there are a lot of issues that come with that, internally and otherwise, that perhaps the public doesn't get a chance to see. But I believe, and I say this very respectfully, and I say this very carefully, because I have all the respect in the world for all of the players in this scenario. If one could trade a world record for a gold medal, I don't know that there would be much choice. And so I think Mike would love to have a gold medal, even though he's a world record holder, because Bob's expanse and his scope and breadth around the world. Bob is like a rock star in Europe, because track and field is all but gone here in the United States, but for the Olympic trials. So whenever we go to the Czech Republic or Lausanne or Serbia or Austria or wherever we go in the world, literally, we walk down the street and he's like a Pied Piper, because they revere and respect what he accomplished during his time. And for his record to continue to last 50 years plus, it'll be 52 years old by the time we get to the Tokyo Olympics and beyond. By the time we get to LA, it'll be over 60 years old. And we have to look at the players on the horizon. There's a Cuban jumper. This jumped 28 feet, as you know, 28.10. So he's hovering over it. But I also represent Al Joyner, who has two great jumpers. But they're not anywhere near threatening Bob's, although Al thinks so. But Bob sits back and relaxes when they jump. But,
So I think on that note, we'll maybe conclude our formal program. Maybe we could ask Bob to take some photographs with some, especially the folks in the Harvard track team. And just want to thank Frank and Bob and Angela for terrific.
Well, let's take some pictures of let's have everybody.
And can we publicly thank Professor Alford
And Alonso.
And
Juliet.
Juliet.
Mrs. Alford, and all of the persons here at Harvard who have made our stay just tremendous, even in the wake of emergencies. Professor Emery, Juliet, you guys stepped up, solved it, and you've made our stay just absolutely
Thank you.
perfect.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you.